Aloha kakahea kakako. Thank you for coming. I know it is Sunday, and I'm going to try and make this as relevant as possible to those of you who actually work with landscaping. I started in 1999 at Wailea Point, working for Island Plant Company. So I was taking care of native plants along that half-mile coastal seawalk, and then I moved to Maui Nui Botanical Gardens in 2001. So we're going to talk about native, exotic, and invasive plants today. I hope you will be inspired to include a few native plants at the end of this talk. So we're going to talk about definitions of native, exotic, and invasive, which is actually more interesting than you think, and how using native plants does support the local ecosystem and can help protect reefs a little bit better than weedy plants. Some key invasive plant species and their effects, and then some natural strategies for controlling invasives. But of course, we're also talking about weeds and weed control, which you'll be listening to a lot of other great experts about that as well. So just a little bit about Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. We're at the old zoo site, so we're right in the middle of Kahului. We're open Tuesday through Saturday. We have cultural workshops all throughout the year. We have big events. Our next one is going to be La'ulu, which is the breadfruit festival that's going to happen on September 6th. We do regular weekly plant sales that we post on our social media, and we do monthly giveaways, which I think that might be of a little bit of interest to those of you who want to just try a new species, get it into your nursery or propagation facilities, because we're always giving away new species to give a try. That's the first Friday of every month. And then our conservation side of the botanical gardens is seed storage, mostly for coastal types of plants. So we are wild collecting all across coastal areas. We're also got a project with ohia. So we have ohia genetically represented from hundreds and hundreds of trees across Maui and Lanai and Molokai. This is where we're located, on a former dune system, right in the middle of Keopuolani Park. This is kind of the history of our site and our soil. So, a million years ago, it was just a full-on dune system. So we're talking really, really really high pH, that is a typo. We're talking like 7.5 to 8.2 pH, and really low organic matter and fast draining. Okay, so that's the basis. Then in 1976, it opened as the county zoo. Did anybody here go when it was the zoo? Yes, okay. And the monkeys, did they throw things at you? Did the monkeys throw? Oh yeah, okay. Well, I actually never saw it because I moved here in 94 and then it closed in 97 and I missed it. But I did go and peek through because I was like, I'm really interested in native plants and I don't know what they look like. And I looked and I was like, oh, they're so ugly. And then I just never thought about it again. Who knew? I was going to work there for 20 years. In 2001, it opened back up as a botanical garden because Uncle Rene Silva, who was part of Protect Ko'olave, he was a groundskeeper there, and he was one of the first people to plant native plants in a landscape back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And so it was already somewhat landscaped with native plants. He had planted a lot of big trees, and it reopened as a botanical garden to honor the work that he had done. So one of the things we've done to try to improve the soil and improve the growing capacity of the soil, and I've been there long enough to really see the effects, are just mulch, and using that organic matter as much as possible to add humus to the fast draining sand. And I can tell you that the number and types of species that we can grow compared to what we had back in 2001 to now has really increased. I don't know if it's because of that or maybe just we got better gardeners. Here's some of the Hawaiian dune natives you might be familiar with. Does anyone have any of these in their garden right now? Yes? Jason, what do you folks, what's one of these that you grow? Naupaka. The naupaka, okay, yeah, a lot of people recognize naupaka. That one is very cool. Did you know that you can actually squeeze that little fruit and it's an eye drop? The Hawaiians use it as eye drops. So if you squeeze it into your eyes, it will wash them out. The naupaka papa next to it is just as easy to grow, and it's an endangered species. There's only about 40 of them left in the world, and it's only about a mile away from the Maui Botanical Gardens. And so some of these plants are super easy to grow. They're really important for dunes. These are some of the plants that do really well at Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. But if I was going to try and plant koa, like on my shirt, never in a million years. They'll die within a few months. So native plants are really specific to the site. So here's a difference just to define native, exotic, and invasive. I know this is kind of a complicated slide, but it's got some really interesting statistics on there. So native means, just a review, I know you guys all know this, established in Hawaii without any human help. So wind, wings, or waves. A lot of these plants came internally by birds because, of course, Kolea and all the other migratory birds that go back and forth every year. The Hawaiian Islands used to be literally covered by those birds. And we're talking about, that's a place that from the ocean, they used to bring in a lot of nitrogen because they were pooping all over the islands, right? You go to Northwest Hawaiian Islands and you can see that birds is a place that plants might have come. Also wind and waves would have been a way to come in, but at any rate, it's before any humans. That's how we define it in Hawaii. The Northeast Organic Farmers Association defines it a little differently, but that's not important because this is what we have. So in native, we have endemic and indigenous. The endemic plants are the really rare plants. They're the ones that are only found in Hawaii. And guess what? About 90% of what's native in Hawaii is actually endemic. And that's because we're 5,000 miles away from any other landmass, and it was really hard to get here. And so they were able to evolve into these unique species. Indigenous means it's native, but it's native at least one other place. So that Naupaka papa is actually the only indigenous Naupaka that we have. I mean, the Naupaka that kahakai, the ones that you guys grow in a lot of landscapes here, whereas the Naupaka papa is an endemic species. Okay, and then there's some more statistic here, about 33% listed as endangered, but let's go over to our introduced side. So introduced means it came to Hawaii by some kind of a human. The first plants that were introduced, of course, came from the Marquesas and Tahiti. Those voyaging canoes that arrived and then became Hawaiian people, they introduced about 26 different species, and those are the canoe plants. Okay, who has a canoe plant on their property? You do, you have, if you have coconuts, you do? Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Kalo, bananas, noni is a canoe plant. It's only 26, but there's a lot of cultivars within there. And then we've got exotic or alien, which is not necessarily bad. Look at how many there are. So this is post Captain Cook. Okay, compared to about 1,300 native species, we've got 12,000 introduced species. So 10 times the introduced species, but not all of them are necessarily bad. So I'm not here to label non-native species as bad at all, because the vast majority, the cultivated plants, about 10,000 plants, are not very harmful. So some of those, the cultivated ones, never even escaped into the wild. They didn't even become weedy in any way. So naturalized just means it escaped into our forests and is growing naturally in the forest. And some of the canoe plants have done that. Kukui, you ever seen kukui trees growing up the valley? That's a little bit weedy, yeah, even though that's a canoe plant. Now, out of those naturalized species that escaped into natural areas, about 200 are considered invasive. So those are the ones that we're really going to focus on today. All right. And then I just wanted to note that within the canoe plants, there are things called cultivars. This is one of the things we do at Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. Not a lot of people are very aware of how many unique cultivated varieties of kalo there are. There used to be at least 400 unique varieties. Now there's only 65 left. Within bananas, there's still 19 unique Hawaiian varieties of bananas. And same with ava, ko, and uala. These are cultivated plants. They're not wild. They don't reproduce in the wild in any way. They're completely dependent on people like domestic animals. And so these can be really, really amazing introductions to your landscape, even though some crop varieties like kalo are really a pain to grow because they have to keep being replanted. But things like bananas and kava, those are plants that are long-lived and very permanent, and there's unique varieties that you can feature in your landscape. And then when we talk about those 200 invasive species, we're talking about any non-native species that causes or could cause harm to agriculture, natural resources, economy, or human health. So some examples of invasive species that aren't plants would be mosquitoes, spreading diseases to native birds, or even spreading things like dengue to us, strawberry guava, which have really reduced the capacity for our forests to collect water and to provide water to us as a fresh water source. Rapid ohia death is an invasive species. It's a fungus, it's a plant disease, but it's also a species that's devastated more than 80,000 acres of ohia trees on the Big Island. And Halal can't even go in and collect ohia anymore for Mary Monarch because of that. Little fire ants, I'm not even gonna get into that, how bad that could be. But Maui Invasive Species Committee is really doing a good job with that one. And increased costs not only of growing food, but also of landscaping. So when you say an invasive plant, what are the characteristics of that? The one thing, the few things especially that define it are they have an ability to establish new plants really, really rapidly under a wide variety of conditions. They have a really high reproductive rate, either by rooting or by seeds, and they can disperse over wide distances. And they have the lack of natural controls on growth. Does anyone here live on the east side, like Haiku area, or anywhere where there's koki starting to develop? I've just started hearing them in my gulch in Haiku, and in Puerto Rico, this is a much beloved little frog that is native to Puerto Rico, and yet they have natural controls like snakes. But here we don't have that, and so we've got these really, we've got people being kept awake by these frogs. So, and I'm one of those people because I'm trying to adapt to it now. So it can take 20 years from the first introduction of some kind of a plant that might become invasive for it to actually show itself as invasive. And the primary source of invasive plants is the landscape industry. Yay for us. 85%, they say, and this is nationally, so I don't really have the figure for Hawaii, but it's got to be pretty similar. And that's just because we're bringing stuff in all the time. One new species every 3 days is introduced to Hawaii. Not necessarily plants, about 20 new insects a year, but other things besides plants. So as a result, we went from 0 to 40 land reptiles. We have 343 new marine or brackish species. We have 6 amphibians that are established here where we didn't have any. And of course, those 12,000 non-native plants, 200 of which are invasive, and 60 species of ants. So of course, ants are not native to Hawaii in any way, and little fire ants are one of those. Contrast that with native plant origins. The estimation for the rate of colonization of a native plant would have been once every 10,000 to maybe 98,000 years to get here and become established. So a very different rate of introduction. It's still happening, it's just happening very slowly. So the entire native biota had to develop from colonization over this huge saltwater, barrier. And so because of that, not only did they find all these little environmental niches and different climates and soils and temperatures and rainfalls that they could invade and then become new species, which is why we have such a high amount of endemism. We also have a genetic effect of only one thing coming in, and then it has such limited genetics that it can evolve really quickly. So there's all these cool things that scientists love to study about native plants that make them very, very interesting, that Hawaii is very unique. Oh, and this is from my favorite book, 1998. This dates me, but I swear, Atlas of Hawaii is really worth getting. You can see a whole lot of statistics about Hawaii. And one of the things you can see here is that birds is the main way that native plants came in. And you can sort of see Indo-Pacific. There's all these different places that they did come from. Here's just an example of that cool evolution that I was talking about. So Campanulaceae is the Lobelia family. It's the largest family in the whole Hawaiian native plants, despite only having about 2,000 species worldwide, which if you know other plants, that's actually pretty small. They think from one introduction of some Lobelia ancestor, we now have 130 endemic species in Hawaii in this family that are in 5 endemic and 1 indigenous genera. So the genera are Delicia, Cyanea, Clermontia, Lobelia, and Brigamia. And for those of us in those low elevation areas, Brigamia is the one that does very well. It's a beautiful plant, looks like a cabbage on a stick. And These other plants could be really good potential landscaping plants for low light areas, which a lot of natives cannot handle because these are in deep, wet forests. But that's just an incredible example of adaptive radiation or evolution of just from one ancestor. Okay, if we use native plants, okay, so native plants are being protected by conservation groups, right? We've got the watershed partnerships, and we've got all the other environmental groups that help to protect those plants. So why should we care about them? Why should we use them in commercial landscapes? Well, there are a few arguments for that. But I'm going to start with why don't do it? Why is it a terrible idea? I've been working with native plants for 20 years, and I can tell you they can be a pain in the butt. They are not as easy to grow as a lot of the plants that we grow in our commercial landscapes. The plants we grow in our commercial landscapes were chosen because they were easy. They were chosen because they don't have a lot of pests. And so I have to be very honest with you and say certain plants in the native hibiscus, the species hibiscus, are harder to grow than the hybrid hibiscus. They're more attractive to pests in some cases. If you're trying to grow them from seed, which is something we do in conservation a lot, there's a lot of extinct pollinators, and there's small genetic populations, and there's just issues that can be a problem. I mean, we've got all kinds of other things: soils, water, climate change, and some species are really particular about like the light and the temperatures and the soils that they want. So some of them, not all of them, are not as easy to grow. However, here's some benefits. You can save irrigation water, and I know your bosses are telling you that they don't want to pay that water bill as much as they are. And if you do get the right plants in the right place, even if you just do one section, you really can reduce the water that you're using in your irrigation system compared to the more tropical species that you have. Some that I have noticed is just people think native plants are really cool. People wear clothing with native plants. People want lei with native plants. Even your visitors are going to pick up on that. And so having native plants in your landscape really makes they understand that you're Akamai, they understand that you support the local culture. Even just a little bit of native plant area, you're displacing new potential invasive plants. And if you are upcountry, which I know none of us are, you are helping birds and insects. However, on the mainland, they're going to talk a lot about planting natives for habitat, for insects and birds. That is not happening as much in Hawaii because those animals live upcountry more than downcountry. However, there is the native bee, which depends on coastal areas, and there's a possibility of bringing in these super rare little native bees if you have a wide area that's diverse with native plants. And then there's this kind of an esoteric argument about unique genetics. What if these plants go extinct? They are going extinct at a really large rate. I've seen species go extinct. I've almost caused species to go extinct. I've worked with the last individuals of certain species, and let me tell you, it breaks your heart when you cannot grow them because they're so fussy and you're not good enough at it. But as these plants go extinct, we're losing potential even economic utility because a lot of plants are the basis of medicine. And even in agriculture, here's an example of an agricultural use of a native Hawaiian plant. This is the very bottom here is our native cotton, and up at the top is one of 28 non-native species of cotton. And all those other 28 species have little nectaries, it's like a sugar water on the stems. Right at the leaf petiole there, you can see an ant that's feeding off of a nectary of one of the cotton species. Well, because the ma'o doesn't have those nectaries, it was actually bred with hybrid cotton for commercial cotton to get rid of them, because having those nectaries is a problem for commercial growers because they don't want ants and aphids to come in. And so this is just one example of how keeping native species around might actually help us economically in the future. Here's some of the Hawaiian cultural practices I was mentioning. These are all from the workshops that we have. We've got a native plant lei, weaving, thatching, and then the below picture is a kapa making class, and all those different colors that you see are dyes. So like I said, cultural competency, understanding that the residents and the people that are visiting do actually value these cultural practices as well. And the plants are the basis of those practices. And then I would also argue just honoring the unique natural history of Hawaii, just understanding that they have values beyond utility to people. And later I will talk a little bit about ecosystem services as well. We mentioned watersheds. So let's go into some key invasive plant species and their effects on biodiversity and reef systems. So I am pretty sure that none of you are growing any of these species in your landscapes. These are the target plants, and if they're starred, then they are on the state noxious weed list, which actually makes it illegal for you to intentionally propagate and distribute them. That's on the far end of the spectrum. Those 12,000 plants, there's only just a very few that are like that. So these are the ones that if you see them growing, and if you know anyone who's growing, and certainly if you know anyone who's propagating them, you would need to report them to the Maui Invasive Species Committee so that they could get rid of them, because they really are causing a huge amount of damage. Here's an example of some really weedy plants that are not really invasive. They're not targeted. Nobody's trying to actually get rid of them totally in forests, but they have been assessed by what is called the weed risk assessment, and they've been found to be extremely weedy, and they are escaping into natural areas. And I know you recognize some of these on the list, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but they do have, I love this. The first one that I'm actually hearing people talk. Any comments? Some of these are our most beloved. White dahlia is used everywhere. It's really easy to grow. It's wonderful. I've grown it. I've planted it, but it is becoming quite a weed on the east side. So it's basically this is a list that's basically saying, if you've got an alternative, start thinking about planting an alternative to these, because these have escaped into natural areas. And I've seen every single one of these still for sale in nurseries. So just to emphasize what I'm trying to say, on one end of the spectrum, we've got completely benign introduced species. So you've got plumeria, carissa, natal plum, shower trees. Those are not causing any harm at all. They're not weedy. They haven't escaped into natural areas. But then as you start to move over to the right into the weedy and invasive section, then it's just on a continuum. It's not like black and white, right? There are some that are super invasive that are black and white, like fountain grass, kahili ginger, and miconia at the very, very end, which there are actually some laws, but there's very few laws about that. And then in the between, we've got the sort of in-between ones that, African tulip tree, people are still planting that, but it is weedy and escaping, and it makes it really hard for those who are working in natural areas to do their job. So it's good for us as landscapers to support those folks by not continuing to plant them and eventually getting rid of them. So here's a website that can help. This is based on the Big Island. It's ponoplants.org, or plantpono.org, excuse me. And you just go in, you can go straight to this tab that says don't plant these. If you want to see, are we growing something that the landscape industry has decided, we're not going to grow this anymore, there are better alternatives. If you do click on one, like here's Alamanda, you'll be able to see what the high-risk traits are and the argument for why we'd like to get rid of this plant and start substituting other plants. And then you'll also see at the very bottom, they'll have plant these instead. And so you'll see some alternatives suggested. Now, not all of them are going to be perfect. Maybe those plant these instead are not even available. You never know. They did try to put in things that are really widely available in the landscaping industry, because a lot of those native plants, those 1,200, are not really widely available in nurseries. There's Maui native nurseries, and is there something on the west side? There's a native nursery on the west side, or no? Nurseries that have some natives, some selection. Almost all nurseries have some natives, like Pohinihina and alpaca, a few things like that. But if you want a really wide selection, Maui Native Nurseries is the big commercial nursery. But you can come to Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. We are happy to help get you plant lists. I'm happy to come to your site and walk and see what your soil looks like and see what you're dealing with. Like, okay, I want to replace this patch of Weidelia with something that's going to be just as easy. And I'll do my best to try to recommend a species. But this is a great place to research. And there's only in this list, again, only 108 species that they're just saying, don't plant these. So we've got about 200 invasives of which they're saying, don't plant these. Here's some more arguments for why we don't want to plant invasive species. If you're in a dry area, you've got invasive grasses that are increased wildfire risk. You've also got less overall coverage. So protecting reefs is meaning keeping runoff from happening, right? Where we do not want soil washing off into the reefs, and invasive grasses do not cover like a native dry landscape does. It does not have the same root system, and it does not have the same cover, and it does not protect soil from runoff. Similarly, wet areas, the invasives will grow so tall and so thick, like strawberry guava, this picture of strawberry guava, they actually shade out all the understories. So in really wet native forests, the understories are almost all ferns. And then there are mid-story and upper story. And so they're much different from Myconia, guava, or aggressive vines that invade understories. So this is a reason why we don't want these new species coming in, making it harder. So basically you've got invasive plants that can totally outcompete natives and result in a lot less biodiversity. A more diverse understory does better modify the erosive effects of rain. So even if you're working with introduced species, you're thinking about different levels and not just one type of thing. Native plants are much slower growing and have much deeper root systems, and they are less competitive with each other. They actually like growing with each other compared to a lot of introduced species, and they are more reliant on that diverse habitat. When it comes to watersheds, that's an ecosystem service that these native plants provide. Here is a kind of a graphic giving you an idea of what a watershed, the idea of a watershed, just using one tree as an example, but we've got the clouds hitting trees, we've got rainfall hitting trees. Both of this is interception of actual water, and that water is collected by those trees into the soil. And the soil moisture, depending on what type of trees and what type of forest it's hitting, can be less or can be more. And I know all of you know that watersheds or aquifers and soil water is where we get our fresh water. So all that irrigation water that we're putting is basically from this system. So UH Manoa has done some studies, and they have actually started to prove what we've always suspected and theorized, and that is that for one species in particular, Ohia lahua, it is way better at collecting water and recharging our watersheds than strawberry guava. So here's some of the native plant different habitats from 200 years ago. This is about how they were distributed in Maui Nui. That's a lot of different habitats. If you ever see soil maps like this or habitat maps like this in the United States, it covers huge areas of one type of habitat. We have so much diversity here, or we did have so much diversity here. Everything from alpine desert to coastal dry shrubland. This is today, we have about 200 invasive species in the white area, dominating about 75% of the Hawaiian archipelago. And this is what it looks like in Maui Nui, where we live. So that's a big loss. That's pretty dramatic. Just 200 years it took to do that, yeah? Because of all those introductions. All right. Hopefully I've convinced you that you don't want to plant any more invasive species. You want to try and get a few of those weed species out of your landscape. If you can give some room to native species in your commercial landscapes, you are doing a good thing for the environment, and all of your customers are going to think you're cool. Okay, so natural strategies for controlling invasive plants and promoting the use of native species in landscaping. And these are topics that Amy and Jill asked me to do. This one, There are other folks that are going to tell you better things, but this is a place where we can have a bit of a discussion. So here is the list from the Northeast Organic Farmers Association of what they would like you to be doing to control invasive plants. So preferred would be hand pulling, digging, repeated cutting to starve woody plant roots. So cut it, it sprouts, cut it, it sprouts, cut it. At one point, somebody's gonna win. I don't know if it's gonna be you or the plant, but you can keep trying. Boiling water, direct application. Has anyone tried weed steaming yet? Anyone tried a weed steamer? Okay, I'll tell you our experience with it. Mowing, yeah, if you mow a lawn, obviously you're not gonna get invasive trees. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Northeast Organic Farmers Association. Smothering, meaning, deep mulches, cardboard, whatever. Girdling, anyone ever tried to girdle a tree? These are not very useful in a commercial landscape because I am not gonna go and girdle my ironwood tree at Maui Nui Botanical Gardens so that we then have a giant dead hazardous tree. But thank you anyway for the suggestion. Here are some allowed for controlling invasive plants. So these are like, well, okay, if you have to, you can still be certified. Motorized equipment, I'm assuming that means like edging, weed whacking, pruning to prevent seed formation. We have done this in a kind of a conservation application. So this picture of the haole koa and our AmeriCorps volunteer is, we're just going in and cutting these seeds just to keep them from spreading. But again, not super helpful for a commercial application. Solarization, that's like putting, plastic down and actually cooking the ground to kill all your weed seeds. Again, not super helpful in a commercial application because it's got to look nice, right? Flame weeders. Has anyone tried flame weeders in their landscape? Okay, we'll talk about that a little more. Prescribed burning, I don't think that's going to happen at any of your 27-acre properties. Organically approved herbicides, you're going to hear a little bit more about those, and we have tried some of those. We have somebody here today that is trying to distribute some of those. And I just want to say one thing. We are the endangered species capital of the world. We should not be proud of that. That is not something to brag about. But of all the endangered plants in the United States, we have 45% of the species. And we also have high endemism in our endangered and in our animals as well. And so conservation control, I just want to say this is not ever going to be a reef-friendly necessarily industry for quite a while because of the invasion curve. So we've got at the very beginning of a new invasive species coming in, it is quite inexpensive to try to control it, whereas as it becomes more and more established, obviously it becomes extremely expensive and impossible to eradicate. So what you can do to help those folks that are managing thousands of acres of forest in Hawaii and live in your neighborhoods is learn and report which are invasive species when you see them, and support their long-term efforts, including their efforts to find effective, safe technologies. Biocontrols are one of those. So there have been introduced species that have actually killed off some invasive plants and have been really effective. One thing they're doing right now is they are releasing male mosquitoes into the forest that have been infected with Wolbachia bacteria so that those male mosquitoes will mate. They're sterile and they mate with the females, and that is reducing populations of mosquitoes up country and in our really high elevation forests. And there are citizen groups that are against this because they don't understand that it's not genetically modified and that mosquitoes are not a species that we would like to protect. So learn about that stuff, help support that, talk to your neighbors about it. Trapping and snaring is a big part of conservation, so hunting and fencing, and then pesticide treatments. They are using herbicide in the forests, and we don't need to get all high and mighty about that because that is really, really necessary at this point in our time and in our history when you're managing thousands and thousands of acres and trying to keep invasive species out, and they do it very safely and very targeted. However, we're in commercial landscapes. We're right next to the ocean. We can do a lot better. We don't have to necessarily use herbicides. However, I sympathize with every one of you because I have to pay people, I have to manage a landscape as cheaply as possible. And so let's go over these one more time, and just, I want to hear a little bit from you about what you think could work a little better for you. So hand pulling and digging. This is obviously really important. It's something we've already been doing. It takes a lot of labor. Who here thinks that this is like their main weed control way of controlling weeds right now? Just show of hand. I'm just curious. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a huge one, right? Okay. Repeating cutting to starve woody plant roots. Is anybody doing this? Nope. We're not doing it either. Boiling water direct application to roots. Weed steaming. Here's a weed steamer in the bottom here. We did try this for quite a few, about 6 to 8 months. We had a weed steamer and we tried it. It's a little tricky for one person to use. You have to be able to drive in, or you have to have 2 people moving it around. It will knock down your weeds just, and our biggest weed at Maui Nui Botanical Gardens is yellow nutsedge. And you know that stuff is like, it's deep in the ground, right? It's like 18 inches or 24 inches in the ground. So this weed steamer has an injector that will go in there, but I'll tell you, it would not kill that nutsedge after 8 months. However, it was great for controlling a lot of other types of weeds, and it knocks it down just like herbicide, and it lasts just about as long as herbicide, except for yellow nutsedge. So that was our experience. All right, mowing, that's not one that I'm using. I mean, we want a landscape that's more than grass, so not using that. What about smothering? Has anybody tried using smothering? Yeah, what was your experience with that?
It works we use it for small areas for guinea grass.
Yeah.
It works.
What do you use?
Back and get the guinea grass out, but
Yeah.
it really makes it a lot easier. Like if you're going to be digging it out,
Yeah.
smother it first and then dig it out.
Got it. Yeah, and it could look nice too because it's just going to be mulch, or maybe you're going to have cardboard and mulch on top. What I found is really hard. Does anyone have trouble with water and watering the ground when you're trying to smother? That's been the issue for us because we're in an arid area. You put 12 inches of mulch, you can really kill things, including the things you want to keep alive. So it's great for getting an area like where we have this weed mat. We had so much bad yellow nutsedge. So I'm going to actually skip to that. So temporary weed mat, that's something we did for the nutsedge. If you put it down and it's very loose and not tight to the ground, the nutsedge can grow up and push it, and then it will just starve itself out after about 6 months. And then you can take it off and start over again. Of course, it is invading from the lawns from the outside, but it's good for quite a while. So that did work for us. Let's see, what about, is anybody doing anything else on this list? Anybody using flame weeders? No, we said no. You said you were doing smothering, Dustin?
Yeah, we try to do mulch and the cardboard, but the cardboard we found that if no more needing to hold it down, and eventually when it starts deteriorating, file openings and
Oh yeah, little pieces blowing around in the wind. Such a pain. Oh gosh. Okay. How about organically approved herbicides? Has anyone tried horticultural vinegar before? Have you tried Weed Zap? There's a product called Weed Zap that's, I think, clove and citrus oil. Just burns down really well. So there are some organically approved herbicides, and believe me, there is no one who loves Roundup more than me. I think Roundup is one of the best inventions ever, but I sprayed it for many, many years, and you know, I see that there are health effects there, you know, and I see that there are environmental effects, and we've committed to not using Roundup anymore at Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. But we are looking for something that can be similar to that, because that is a really effective tool. So these organically approved herbicides have been a pretty good substitute for us. They're expensive, and they do need to be applied when the weeds are very, very small. So they will not work on a big clump of panicum or something like that. But yeah, you'll hear other people talk about these too. All right, and then one other thing I thought of that's not on this list is that temporary weed mat was one thing, and then We just find in an old mature landscape, and I know you know this too, when you have deep shade and you have well-established plants, you have a lot less weeds. So obviously you do want to protect your soil from runoff. That is the most important thing for protecting the reefs. But there are places where deep shade is very, very welcome and also can help you control weeds in your garden. So we've kind of moved off into, invasive species being the same as weeds, which I did tell you is not the same in Hawaii, but good to have a discussion. Anybody else have any other thoughts or ideas about what's worked in their landscape for controlling weeds other than using Roundup?
Cover crops.
You've used cover crops. Okay. So again, yeah, like just getting stuff established. So you're not doing it like where you plant it and then you let it sit for 6 months and then you pull it up. You're just establishing new stuff. Yeah.
Grass maintenance.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay for that.
Yeah. It definitely helps once it's established, for sure. Any other thoughts on weeding? Okay. I know you guys are the best at the hand weeding. You've got it down. You know how to do it very quickly and efficiently. And I know that is a huge part of what's happening out there. Okay, here is one of my final slides. I just want to talk about, if you're thinking about incorporating natives for the first time or you're just getting started, there's 3 things that I would just say are really, really helpful to keep in mind. One is understand where are you and where are you planting it. Now, I know we all have irrigation systems, so your moisture zone, if you're in an arid area that normally would be getting about 30 inches of rain a year, like where we are in Kahului, we are changing that moisture zone with our irrigation system, but you have all this fine control. So if you're trying to get it down from irrigating every day to irrigating once every 2 weeks, it's absolutely possible with these natives. There are places where we only irrigate a little bit in the summer at Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. There's a new book called Go Native that came out in 2022, has some pretty good plant lists and little landscape designs for people who are trying to get started on this.
I love that book.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. We got to write something like that for Maui, yeah? Okay, and then your choice of natives. So a lot of times when the very beginning, when we were trying to get native plants out in the landscape, people come to our native plant sales and they would just be like, anything that was native, they would just try it. But then they would come back and be like, oh, I put it in the ground and it just died. Because we were selling some pretty rare stuff that was very fussy. And we didn't really know the difference between fussy and non-fussy, but there are lots of non-fussy natives. The first non-fussy native is a plant that has a wide natural range. So if you see, and I'll show you how you can tell that in the next slide, ule, or it's in the rose family. It grows almost everywhere in the wild. It also does really well in landscapes. And it's one of the few that you can cut it right down to the ground if you want to, and it'll come back. So this is a great one for like pruning into really formal shapes. I think you could absolutely do topiary with ule. Now that is a very rare thing in native plants. Most native plants don't like being pruned at all. And then nayo. Nayo is another one that not many people grow, but it is a wide natural range and can grow almost anywhere. And then keystone species means if in the wild, if something like a dune was disturbed, what's the first thing that would pop up? What would be the plant that would start getting established first? On a dune, it's a lot of times pohuihui, sometimes it's pauohi'iaka. In a lava field, it's ohia. Find out what those keystone species are. That will be your first one to get started with, because that's going to be easy and more successful. And that's just from lots and lots of killing lots and lots of native plants over 20 years. That's why I'm telling you that. I've killed more native plants than you guys will ever try. I don't know if I can actually hit any of these, but some of these, yeah, maybe. All right. We've got some data sets in here that are kind of cool. I just want to show you, we were talking about trying to find out, do I have a native species, you know, like, okay, I want to plant this plant. Is it going to grow where I want to? Okay, what if I want to grow a koa tree? Okay, this is a USGS site. Okay, this is where the natural range of koa trees would be. I am located here. That's Maui Nui Botanical Gardens. Here's where we are. The answer is no. Do not plant a koa tree. Thank you. Not worth it. I still see people trying to plant koa down in Kaului, and I watch them die. But that's okay. Let's see, what's one that we could choose? Oh, well, this one's kind of a tricky one, but let's see. I've never actually clicked on this one. Puakala, our native poppy. Oh, okay. That one's native almost everywhere. That's a wide-ranging species. And it's a weird one. It's kind of hard to plant it. You have to plant the seeds directly, but it's very flowery and beautiful and cool. Okay, and probably it would work. So anyway, this is a pain in the butt to use because it's a giant spreadsheet, but it was done by a US Geological Survey. It is based on historical ranges, and it's a good one. Okay, now how do I, okay, I can't get back to my, yes, here we go. Oh yes, here it is, thank you. Yeah, okay, I see it. Thank you.
To the right.
There we go. No, that's not it.
I'm also applying for coral restoration permits, so.
No, thank you. Yes, here's her permit. I'm sorry, I didn't practice this part.
No, you're all good.
Yeah, give me back to my slide. Oh,
Hold on.
okay.
Just see
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Now that one.
I think I closed it down. Oh, nice.
If you do 4 fingers, slide
Oh, okay, thank you. I love it.
it. Just discovered.
All right, well, I'm gonna end a little bit early, but just go through these real quick. So this one, UH Botany, this one is maybe not as useful for landscaping, but one thing that's kind of cool is you can look up at the top and it will tell you what was the origin for the plant. So if it was birds internally and how many ancestors were there, so you can kind of look at like which ones are really cool and rare. Okay, Bishop Museum Plants of Hawaii. This is a good one for if you're trying to get names and you want to know the correct name if you're labeling. This is a new site and it's kind of putting all the information in one place. The spellings will be correct and you can use this for labeling. Same with the Smithsonian Flora of Hawaii. We use this for our labeling. These are correct names. Do not just go with whatever's on the internet if you're trying to do a label. Or you can send it to me and I'll help you figure out. Yeah.
I was like, how about this? She had to edit it.
Little bit of edits, yeah. Star Environmental is really cool. This is gonna be my last one I'm gonna show you. So has anyone used this before? Let's see if I can open it up. Okay, another database, but this has been really helpful for identification. So for example, when somebody says to me, I want to plant the true Lawai, and I'll say, which Lawai, oops, do you have? I don't have it, I just spelled it wrong, sorry. Lawai, is that correct?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we've got two of them. This is the one that I think most people grow. Phytomosaurus grossus. What's cool about this is not native. Look at this. It's naturalized. It's actually an introduced species, but it does have a native name. What's kind of interesting is you can actually hover over these. They've been taking photos of native plants and introduced plants for 30 years, and they always put exactly where that plant came from. And guess what? They're almost all from Maui. So if you want to know where things actually grow, you can look at this. But then I'll say, okay, so it's not, the true Lawai is actually Pe'ahi, and you can look and see what that actually is supposed to look like. So, and you notice there's a lot less pictures of this, and if you hover over them, they're almost all in nurseries. So it's another way of just saying like, okay, where are these native plants actually growing? If I want to plant the true Lawai that's actually native and endemic, is this available? It's just a really quick way of looking and seeing. And you can do things like type green fruit, even if you're trying to identify something too. Really good, yeah. Okay, that's about all. Thank you so much. Let me know if you folks need plant lists, and feel free to come by anytime, Maui Nui Botanical Gardens, see a native plant landscape that's about 25 years old and get inspired. Thank you for your attention and time.